So I finally made the decision and I pre-ordered the Canon EOS R5. I wasn't expecting it to come in till January. It's, I guess, December 1st right now, so pretty happy that it's a month early. So camera store just called yesterday. I am super excited about this, so let's go get that thing and just let's see what it can do. Welcome back to the channel. My name is Ben Schubert, and today I'm just going to give my first impressions about the Canon EOS R5. This camera came in about a month ago, and frankly, I have barely used it. Like, I've used it here and there for things, some family things. I have not taken it out on any professional shoots yet. So for the first couple weeks, all I had were really simple SD cards. So this is just a simple 95 megabyte SD card. I used them for my EOS R. So that's all I had for a bit while I was waiting for the CF Express cards. It's actually surprisingly capable what you can do with just an SD card. I did one small video that, False Creek in 8K video a couple weeks back. I just was out doing errands one day and brought the camera with me and just shot a bunch of 8K footage of False Creek and the area. And it turned out surprisingly well, and it was actually really surprising to be able to use, the 8K on a fairly low speed memory card. Now there's definitely some limits because this card couldn't keep up with the buffer of the camera, so I really only got a minute or two of shooting in 8K, and frankly it wasn't that limiting compared to how I normally shoot, because I pretty rarely shoot for longer than a minute or two when I'm doing B-roll. Now obviously I couldn't do things like 120p or shooting in all eye. Now my first impressions getting this camera out of the box is just how much it feels and looks like an EOS R. The only difference is it's like an EOS R with proper 5D button layouts. So everything else is exactly the same. It's really just the wheel and the joystick which have been brought back. So it actually took me a bit of time to get used to the wheel again because it had been a while. One thing that has come up with the way this button layout is you've got 3 wheels now. So you've got one you can set for ISO, one you can set for your aperture, and one for your shutter speed. Joystick, it's nice to have. I've had them before on cameras and have never really used them as much as I think I've been using it on this one. It's good to have the wheel back. It did take me a minute to get used to it. I was used to just pressing the buttons to get through everything. Screen feels just like the EOS R. I know it's bigger, but you can't tell unless they're side by side. The on-off button, it's got an extra little thing there. I was happy with the previous one that had little texture going all the way around, but probably also easier for people to turn on and off if you have gloves, that sort of thing. Now weight wise, I know it's only maybe 200 grams heavier than the EOS R, but I don't really notice it. It feels the same, but also I always have a cage on, which adds to the weight anyways, so, and I like that weight. Now for all you card slot nerds, there's 2 card slots. I think it's handy. It's not something that particularly comes up for me. I'm not someone who is particularly, put out by only one card slot, but it's nice to have 2 options of different card slots for me. So having an SD card and a CF Express card, I think, is a nice option. but I only really use the CF Express for certain codecs. Everything else you can really do with just an SD card. Now on the other side of the camera, there are the, you know, input, output, that sort of thing. You got a micro HDMI, which is smaller than what you had before. Now it would have been nicer to have a bigger HDMI cable, like full-size HDMI would have been awesome. At the same time, I'm not sure how much I care. I haven't really had a problem with mini or micro HDMI yet. That might just be my future, I'm sure. Who knows what my future will hold? Maybe it'll hold HDMI problems, which again is kind of a nice thing to have a cage, because I also I'm able to lock those cables down so they don't move and switch very often. So now let's talk about image quality out of this camera. I think that this is the camera everyone expected 2 years ago when the EOS R was released. I think if they had released this sensor, it would have blown everyone away. I don't think they would have been really ready to pull that off, considering it seems like they were barely ready to pull this one off. So, but as far as image goes, it really feels like an EOS R, but without all the limitations that the EOS R and the 5D4 had, right? So I think the EOS R, they wanted to test out the new mirrorless body and system, but instead of going all in on a new sensor, they just moved the 5D series into a mirrorless form factor. Now for this one, they're really trying to see how far they can push their sensor technology, and in some ways they pushed it a bit far, but in some ways they really just like have let things stay open for us to push as far as we need them to go, right? So by now everyone knows the limitations of this camera, at least to some degree, right? They've heard of overheating, they've heard of, you know, the wobble gate business, but for the most part, understanding that, you can make your decision as to like what you want to do. Now, for the limited time that I've used this camera, I've not run into overheating at this point, unless I've actually forced it. And even then, I got the warning, but nothing ever came of it. Now, as far as image quality, if you're used to looking at the 1080 footage from the EOS R, it's just like color-wise, contrast-wise, it looks exactly like that, but with just more resolution. You know, so as a result, it is sharper, clearer, more detailed, that sort of thing. But it's just not as 1080-ish. If you're used to the look in cameras like the Canon EOS R, it's not gonna be a big change from that, except that it won't have the limitations, right? So when you're shooting in 4K 60, you're shooting full frame. The 4K looks great. The 4K 120 looks amazing. And now I'm going to do a separate video about this, but everyone complaining about the 4K 120 being in 30p needs to chill out. Because here's the thing about 120 frames per second locked into 30p being turned into 24. It becomes 150 frames per second. So it's actually a huge benefit for it to be in 30 frames per second as its container codec, if that makes sense. I think I'm going to do a whole video on it. I think that's like a really fascinating topic to me, because I feel like the math is overlooked and people are just seeing the specs and not really seeing what can be done with it. Now, as for wobblegate is real, especially if you're wider than 24 mil. They really need to work on that. It really needs to become a lot less aggressive on wider lenses. So the camera feels like it is often fighting itself to get a stable image, but as a result, it's getting a pretty wobbly image. Now, one complaint I have been hearing is people saying you can't turn off the IBIS and keep on the lens control, but I've actually found that that's not the case, and that you can turn the IBIS off in the camera but continue to use the lens control. The only issue is that you have to go into the camera to do that. So far it doesn't seem like there's a way to map a button where you can just toggle it on and off, which would be awesome. Definitely having that, and if they could in further firmware just like tone it down on the IBIS when you're in wide lenses, that would be really great, because it just doesn't seem necessary to have it that intense. And then one last thing I want to talk about is stills. It looks really sharp, but I almost think that like one of the things that makes the images look so much better isn't necessarily the resolution as much as it is the autofocus, right? It just tracks eyes so much better that when you actually get an image of someone, the eyes are like tack sharp and it looks just great, right? And I feel like that is almost the most important part about this camera's, you know, stills image quality. It's just how good the autofocus is at this point. All right, so that's my first impressions. I will be getting into this camera a lot more over the foreseeable future. I'm not someone who switches cameras out every year. In fact, I'm someone who keeps cameras for years. So I will be digging into this lots. We'll be talking about it. So if you found this video helpful, hit the like button, you can subscribe, see more videos like this. If you have any questions about this camera, leave them down in the comments and I will see what I can do about answering them. All right, anyways, see you later.